Welcome to the Probability Podcast. Discussions on emerging and converging technologies, problems that are being solved, and the probability of positive and negative outcomes that we might expect. Now, please welcome your hosts, Jason, the generator Spracklin, and Patrick, the discriminator Lozon.
Hi, everyone. Today's topic on the Probability Podcast is converging technologies and specifically language translation. So, I'll pose the question, how can AI improve on our limited capabilities today with auto translation? And as well, what types of technologies could we converge to improve upon that? And ultimately, can AI and other tech help improve communications between different cultures and provide other benefits to society? So, Patrick, Mr. Discriminator, what do you think?
Absolutely. I think there's quite a number of technologies that are converging today to really help with this particular problem. I had put together an article on LinkedIn a while back just around this topic. And what it was we originally tied this back to an old Star Trek episode. You know, they had filmed it in '66, and it was about the Horta, and basically Captain Kirk and Nimoy and Bones beamed down to the planet, and there were these miners, and they were getting killed by this strange creature in the mines. And one of the main things, of course, with Star Trek is they have this universal translator that they use, and that translator is just magic because essentially it speaks in almost all alien languages, and you never hear the actual alien speak other than speaking in English.
But, truly ahead of its time, eh?
Yeah, but can we get to that point? Was an interesting question, it's not just the translator like a Google Translate or something like that. It requires a number of different components working together to get there. What's really challenging with the hoarder idea, there was no translator for the Horta because the Horta really didn't speak. But in the end, we'll dovetail into that a little bit because there's some other technologies there that are quite interesting as well.
Yeah, well, it's like, not all communication is verbal, and, a lot of communication is nonverbal. It's looking at expressions and body language and those types of things. So,
Exactly.
So really, it's a good example of there's a limitation even on the universal translator of not being able to read the language, but perhaps if it was more advanced, it could have read intent of the Horta.
The intent was to get eaten or something like that, if I remember
potentially,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, if we look at LLMs, bottom line, they were designed using language, right? So that's their strong point, and their original intent was to help this, build that interface. Now, the idea of translation means you have multiple language support, and if you look at the existing models today, they do, that's one of their main features is being able to translate throughout 100 different languages or so. We have thousands, of course, but if you have to look at sub-dialects of a language as well, which are kind of regional manifestations of the language, but they're really original, and they have their own slang, their own terms, their own culture embedded. So you even have that today. You can look at a map of Canada, the U.S. You can get what are the different dialects there, and you'll see all these. It's quite interesting actually if you Google it. All these different sub dialects. But that all being said, that's a challenge. That's the gray area in language translation. It's pretty difficult. It's not just a matter of understanding the speaker, and if they're slurring or they don't pronounce certain things 100% like myself. But the idea is being able to manage understanding the speaker, but also on understanding that particular dialect of the speaker, and what that means, right? Because we know our words, invoke an imagery. Really, they convey meaning, right? And that meaning sometimes is different than that word being used somewhere else. And we've
Yeah.
always heard cases of that. Somebody trying to sell a car and they have to change the name of it because it
Then
means
there's
something else. You know,
Yes,
so
there's also, tone and energy and inflection and things that are subtleties in language that if you don't speak that language, you wouldn't know, you wouldn't understand that, oh, there's something else going on here, that simply if a translator is just giving you the words, then you're really taking that on face value. If you think about the one of my favorite movies, Mars Attacks, where the aliens come down and they invent this translator thing to understand because they're using some sort of obviously language that they can't interpret. And the famous scene in the movie is where the aliens go, we come in peace, and the humans are like, yay, and they release the doves into the air, and then the alien proceeds to shoot the dove with a laser gun and start killing everybody and creating mayhem. So in other words, sort of the translation was "we come in peace," but without the understanding the inflection, there was certainly something else, some other ulterior motives going on there, right? So
yeah. Well, I just want to funneling back to that article. What I talked about there was if you had a translation tool that was that utilized, for instance, augmented reality glasses. So it had the ability to provide the content from the universal translator onto your glasses, but also speak to you through the speakers. You would have
mhm.
this unique connection. So you'd have three parties. You'd have the external party you're talking to, you'd have yourself, and then you'd have the universal translator. So that gives you the ability to have this conversation. So if the person speaks to this external person speaks to you in whatever language, that can be translated, and that translation can be provided to you via speakers to you only, and
Mhm.
through its understanding, of course, of the speaker's inflections and all that. And then you would take that, and then you want to respond, right? That's usually case in point. Um, the idea would be, how would you respond? Now, most translation tools are, speak into this box, and then uh, it translates, and then you speak into the box, and then it translates back, right? So it's
Mhm.
kind of a, very, I call that clunky, right? But the idea being that it's very basic, right? And if you look at it from a converging technology point of view, with these augmented reality glasses, it it could actually provide that third person, that AI person, and that AI person, we'll call him Mr. Universal Translator. He's going to give you he's going to be the voice in your ear. So not only can he say, well, I can, I could, say the translation and be on my way like the old style box, would
Mhm.
do. It could also just say that to your ear, right? And then, through a little bit of uh, dialectic magic here, you could actually speak those words because you're kind of being coached. So, it's like having somebody who knows the language, kind of coaching you on how to what to say back, right?
And also pick up on the inflections,
Yeah,
perhaps, or the tone, or the right intent, because an old style translator would simply read it out, perhaps somewhat monotone. When you look at, there's some tools out today. For example, the intro for this podcast. I worked with some software that where you type in some text and then it speaks the text, and it gives you all sorts of tools to change the cadence, the variability, the inflection, all these things that are quite interesting that to the extent where I had to play with it quite a bit to get it to a point where it had the right tone and expression and cadence and everything. But, an AI could figure that out more on the fly, so that when if you were to say something, let's just say you said a word that was maybe needed an inflection to convey, right? Because there's many different ways that you can say words, and you say them in a certain way that it can come across as aggressive. You say it in another way, it comes across as friendly, and it can be the same words. So I think translation is not just words, but like I said, intent or tone and that type of thing.
Yeah, you hit that 100% on the mark. To see that this is part of the value add, right? That we can get into with these, I don't know, we'll call them, next level systems. For instance, that little universal translator can talk to you about customs. You should bow, or you should be, present in this way and with these features, these expressions and that kind of thing as well. That coaching side of things, right? They can give you a more genuine appearance, and the listener will understand that better, right? From that perspective, though, um, you know, those particular technologies were, if you think about it, let's break it down here. First off, you got this wearable tech, like I talked about with the glasses and such, which are out there today, right? And then we talk about an AI that's running, and that AI, technically, you don't want that, universal translator utilizing an AI that platform that is networked, right? It needs to be contained, right? It needs to be local. It can't rely on, I only got one band on my, I can't really reach a cell tower, right? The idea is that you have these narrow band AIs that are able to run on, let's say, a cell phone, right? So these we'll call them, local mobile, units that are purposely built, right? So that's another technology, and that's coming out already. And then we have, the speech to sound processing, right? Then we got speech to text and text to speech, right? All that is occurring now. If you think about augmented reality, you can actually see on your glasses on the inside. You could see, the text coming along the bottom. As it's, somebody says something and then it's translated. You could actually see the text as well. So there's a lot of that you can implement, right, to ensure that the messaging is clear. So that's another piece of technology there. Now let's drill down a little more. Then we got visual image processing. So you have glasses and you're talking to a specific person in a crowded room full of people who are talking many other different languages, right? We're up in the ante right now, right? Well, the person who you're looking at, right? That's the visual side of things. That's the visual syncing component to that. So being able to not only translate, but translate based on syncing that particular communication image with the actual voice, right? That's kind of next level as well. So being able to take that image and say, yeah, this is occurring along with the voice. This is the same image. This is the same person, right? Now, this is where things get interesting, because not only can visual imaging processing look at a particular subject and break down, to understand that particular person's emotions and how they're presenting. It could actually divulge some interesting things. And where I'm getting at is that people get fooled. Otherwise, they would never be serial killers in the world. They would never get away with it. But there would never be con men, right? The people are easily fooled, and a lot of this is based on the fact that they'd be able to, manage and manipulate their expressions and their tone of voice and all those other critical factors that are convincing, right? What's interesting though is there's been a lot of studies on this, but there's what gives that particular person away is their actual intent is what they call micro expressions, and they get caught, right? And they can get caught through AI. So we get fooled, but AI won't, right? It can
Yeah, yeah.
be programmed to actually catch that, right? Which is interesting because you're let's go back to what you talked about. Somebody in a completely different language, a different context, a different culture, and they're talking in a different method, right? A boisterous method. You think they're angry at you, let's say, right?
Hmm.
You're understanding based on how they're behaving, based on your exposure, right? Your how you have seen people in the past, but you're in this different country, right? You've been plopped into this whole new environment and with different people, and you don't quite understand the intent, right? And this is where AI can help you, right? Because that's the other side of it is, you know, these tools can also be through the magic of cell phones and stuff. They can be location bound. They're regional. The dialect is regional. The culture is regional, right?
Yeah, for sure. And if you're
Yeah,
not used to being in a certain place, say you're, on vacation somewhere, you're in a crowded marketplace, you're jet lagged, you're maybe a little bit nervous because of, you're in a new environment. You're not going to pick up on those subtleties, for example, right? So I think this could sort of help you navigate. I mean, for a lot of people, it's very intimidating to go into a completely different setting, culture, and find their way through it. So something like an AI that can fill in some of those gray areas and help you understand intent and that type of thing, I think is a really interesting area that we could divulge into for sure.
yeah. And if you want to take it to the next level, right? If you have this AI technology really well tuned, um, it could actually be utilized as a lie detector, right? It could help
Hmm.
law enforcement, right? It will catch on to these micro expressions where we would normally. If you look at the lie detector, which was based on like 1 point, right, or 2 points, it was it's like the old version of what we're capable of doing today, right? Because the idea is you combine all this information, right, and with that, we'll say convergence of information, you now can isolate points where we have contradictory, behaviors, and that
Hmm.
then can be used to isolate. Oh, you know, this is not correct. There's a problem here, right? This person, we've all had that gut feeling, right? We don't quite trust that person, or there's just something about that person that you just don't like. You just can't put your finger on it, right? And you say, well, why is that, right? Well, you're picking up on that, all those micro expressions. You are picking up on contradictory. Somebody's saying something, but their tone's wrong. You know,
Hmm.
they're being a little bit disingenuous, right? And um, that's interesting because if you think about it from a technical point of view, you have to really look at all these different streams of not only the visual processing, right? But also the voice processing. Again, going back to all these different convergences of technologies but being able to do this real time too, right? So
Hmm.
this is the other side of it, right? The processing side of this, to be able to take all that information and then make sense of it, which is something. If you thought about it, 10 years, 20 years ago, it was just completely impossible.
Hmm.
So this is kind of exciting stuff if you think about it.
Yeah, it's kind of how our brains work right now. If we think about within our own sphere, we interact with people. So, for example, if you were to have a conference call where you could only hear people speak, you would only have one slice of perspective into that. For example, even if somebody was speaking very normally, if you were in a video call, you could sense their mood just by their facial expression, like you said, or some of those micro expressions, or you could tell whether that they were anxious, maybe they're sitting forward in their seats, or whether they're disengaged and sitting back. These are things that we don't know unless we can see them, which is where in this age of remote work and everything, people were very much relying on video calls as opposed to conference calls, because it gives that 360-degree view of people and what's going on. So for example, with language translation, if it was only translating audio, then you're only getting one piece of the puzzle, I guess, as it were, right? So
Yeah.
it's, for example, like that's sort of the idea, I think, of convergence of technologies where you're giving that 360-degree view so that people can get a better picture for that. What do you think in terms of where that might be taken to the next level? Like, part of what we talked about in the last episode was sort of super intelligence or sentience, and that it can take in all these things. It can visually see someone on a camera, and we saw that with the most recent release of ChatGPT, where in one of the videos the guy asked him, what do you think my mood is today, and that it could see that he was smiling, for example. Now, to what degree of subtleties this particular technology can pick up on, I'm not sure, but certainly something that was more had more empathy and awareness and emotional intelligence could take that information and then convert it. So I guess my question is, do you think that we have to achieve this sort of super intelligence for this whole concept you're describing to work, for example?
No, no, I don't think we need the super intelligence to do that. I mean, what we're doing today with trying to make robot expressions accurate. You think about there's considerable amount of effort um, being being invested to take this synthetic being, this robot with a human like face, and make that person or that AI driven entity to be a person, right? And those
Mm-hmm.
are, you think about all the minor inflections and expressions that we do on our face, right? That's right now they're doing a ton of work on isolating every one of those, you know, behaviors, and then from there they're building it into to actually develop that from an expression point of view when they're talking. Now,
Mm-hmm.
that also means once you have all that information, it also means you understand it for the incoming information, not just for outgoing, right? You've basically broken down, you know, human expressionism for communication, which is, then you can build that into the model. And you don't need, you know, well, you do need processing power. I'm not going to say you don't need that, but the idea is the tools and the models will help reduce that, right? So when you think about this visual processing, right? Your visual processing is more of a synchronized input, and another level of integration of understanding, right? Of communication, and addition to the voice, right? Or the note, we'll call it the audio side. So you get the audio
Mm-hmm.
track, you get the visual track, and you're pulling all that information together. Now, automobiles, for instance, they're doing the self-driving autonomous vehicles. They do have the audio side, but they're really focused in on the high-speed capabilities of pulling in visual cues, right? Um, that requires a lot of processing, right? To be to be able to, you think you travel at 60 miles an hour, you know, um, you have very little time to respond, right? And this is where, if you think about it, AI can actually, these AI tools and these computer tools can actually respond sometimes quicker than we can, right?
Hmm.
Which is interesting, right?
So what about if that gets extrapolated out to, some applications like law enforcement, right? If we want to
Yeah,
think about, sort of science fiction, back to the original RoboCop movie, for example, right, where they took this police officer and augmented him to be RoboCop, and why they sort of did that was because initially they had created this autonomous law enforcement robot that was programmed not to hurt humans, or at least not to hurt humans. I had no violent intent, I suppose, right? And then there's the famous scene where they're demonstrating it in the boardroom, and the guy's basically, he says, "Put your hands up," and the guy puts his hands up, and somehow the AI has gone wrong, and it ends up, killing this guy.
yeah,
And they realize that without that human element in there, that there was that danger of this happening. And so I think that whole movie was the battle between the people that wanted to go in that direction versus the people that wanted to build more Robocops. But they thought by building a Robocop and putting that human element in there, that it would be that it would work better, that it wouldn't kind of go off the rails and that type of thing. So I think that's an interesting angle on translation, because I mean, in that instance, it totally misinterpreted that this guy was innocent and he was putting his hands up, for example, whereas, RoboCop understood that difference, for example, right? So I think from that perspective, it's interesting, in terms of, the different uses, because it's sort of a fine line between utilizing an AI to do something like law enforcement, or even in warfare, versus a human. So what do you think about that in terms of, where these applications could be used beyond sort of the basic, I can use this when I'm traveling, or whatnot? Where else
yeah.
could this be applied, for example?
Well, I just want to funnel back to your original comment there, right? If you're using this as a translation tool and you get, a translation that, let's say this, your universal translator has problems with it, and it's going to come up with, possibly a range of possibilities, one or two or three different things that it thinks, or it's going to come up with something, off the wall, like it's completely misunderstanding. I mean, that happens to us normally too, right? I mean, that's part of communication, right? Um,
Hmm.
the
There's
idea is that
always
you're going to get,
misunderstandings.
yeah, you get this misunderstanding. Now, the idea being that, it's coming from a different language to you is a little more complex, but, you know, it's going to happen. You can't expect everything to be perfect, right? There's every tool, you're going to work at the 90% level, and you're going to have to deal with that 10% inaccuracy. Now,
Hmm.
this doesn't mean that, you're going to have a Gatling gun pointed at you and you're going to be blown to smithereens either. I remember that particular scene, and that was, I guess that was one of the better scenes in RoboCop, where they talked about, where they demonstrated the scariness, right, of
Oh, for
of
sure,
what's
yeah.
of what these particular, automated killing machines could be. It was a little bit eye opening when you really thought of it. But that being said, let's just jump back to your other question now. You basically said, what else could be done, right, with this type of technology? This opens the doors for so much. It's
Hmm.
incredible. Okay, let's just say we take our translator, right, and we just put it on, just auto mode, and say, we just want you to be, at work as a, amplifier, right? So somebody talks to you. There's no real translation. It just amplifies whatever's being said. Well, what you've done there now is you have if you have a person who's hard of hearing and they're in a crowded area and they're wearing these augmented reality glasses, and they're tied into their special software. You say something, it's going to visually, um, you know, automatically lip read, so to speak, and it's also going to be able to break through the noise, the ambient noise, and isolate what's being said, and then basically tell you what that person said in that, noisy environment, right? So essentially, you just augmented your ability to hear in a very difficult environment, right? And if you're hard of hearing, right, that's great because you're basically, up in the ability to receive signals, right? So that all being said, I mean that's a minor one, but for some people that can be, a life changing.
Yeah, or if you're deaf, I mean, right now there
Yeah,
are deaf people that can read lips, but to what degree? Sometimes if someone is not enunciating, in terms of moving their mouth enough, they can't read lips, or maybe they don't read it, correctly. Certainly, an AI that can detect things visually could probably get fairly proficient at reading lips. Oftentimes they have to rely on sign language and things, and not obviously not everybody knows or practices sign language, so it certainly could benefit people at a significant disadvantage,
yeah.
for sure.
So let's keep going down that road. So let's say you have somebody that is essentially mute, right? They've had cancer, they've had a stroke. I don't know. It's so many different possibilities there. So they essentially cannot speak. They don't have the gift of speech. Um,
Hmm.
Now, technically, what does that leave you as a person? I mean, you have right now you have to type into devices and that kind of thing. Now, if you think about what's out there today from a point of view of augmented reality, there's a number of different tools out there that we're trying to expand with augmented reality. That one is the virtual keyboard, right? And
Hmm.
that's the ability to basically input text into the tool and then have it do something with that, right? And in this case here, we want it to provide a speech, right? We'd want it to say something in a particular voice, and like you had alluded to before, Jason, was you could even choose the voice, right? If you wanted to sound like a Rambo, you could do that, right? Um,
Hmm.
or whoever, right? But you can choose your voice, and these a lot of these AR tools, they also have project like speakers you can project out sound with. So the idea being that not only can you make a particular message up, right? You could actually project that out, right? Um, that means, of course, that somebody who is mute can now receive an incoming message, and then through different technologies, form a response, and then project that response out. How do you do that, right? Well, there's different approaches on this that they're looking at. One is they've actually, projected a virtual keyboard on the palm of your hand, and you can just type it. Right? That's real. That's today.
Hmm.
Another one is basically they're utilizing where you're typing, on a surface, right? But there's no keyboard there, but it's projected onto that space, and you can actually type out full words. There's also other technologies where the AI can put together a response, and then you can use just your eye movements to select which one you want, and then put that out. Right. There's also technologies that are where you have ring sensors and wrist sensors. These are all coming out today that basically help you figure out what you're trying to type to replace the idea
Hmm.
of having a real keyboard of and this of course is it's big in the game industry, where you want to be able to type in information and make your characters do whatever, but moving it to the next level of communication, if you turn letters into words, geez, that expands it even that much more. right?
Yeah, well, look
Um,
at what Elon Musk is doing with this Neuralink idea that he's developing, right? That's actually turning thoughts into words or into movements, for example, right? So to your idea of somebody who can't speak, for example, if a Neuralink is able to take those thoughts, put it through an AI translator, they'll be able to speak. There was a breakthrough where they had somebody that could control a mouse with their mind, for example. I mean, that's a whole different level of being able to interact with others in a whole kind of new way. It's kind of interesting in a sense because it also has implications for just in general, right? Like, yes, we can think about the person that needs to augment because they have a disability, but what happens when these Neuralinks become ubiquitous and people who aren't disabled are using them for different reasons? Certainly for um, translation purposes, it's interesting, but it's there's so many other implications when we start using sort of augmented technology. We're getting to that sort of Terminator category of augmenting humans to be able to do more than they could before, and not solely relying on tactile type things like speech. Really, this there's a lot of controversy around that, but certainly for people who are at a disadvantage, any sort of technology that helps them get back into the realm of humanity is certainly huge, right?
yeah, I agree 100%. And these, for instance, these embedded chip technologies, they're changing too. They're morphing as well. There are technologies out there where they've used, kind of a sucrose, very fine layer, and they've implemented these sensors and they've pushed them into the brain. And, because they've got this sucrose coating and stuff, they've managed to uh, actually not uh, generate, your brain has an automatic inflammatory response to a lot of these devices, right? It rejects them,
Mm-hmm.
So that's not without its own problems, right? The idea is you just don't stick devices in your brain and you're good to go, right? Your body is an amazing machine, and if it sees something alien there, it's gonna, reject it. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and that type of, we'll call that more severe, you know, types of man-machine interfacing, right? The golden duck, the golden goose. It's not the
Yeah.
duck, but the golden goose. Everybody's after right now is they want to get that ability to derive what somebody's thinking in a method that is not a direct physical connection, right? And so nobody really needs to have a surgery or per se, right? And have some kind of, chip inserted, right? Everybody would love to get to that point. But we're not quite there yet, right? Will we get there? I'm not
Mm-hmm.
sure, right? Keep in mind the observer, which would be the device that would be, you know, sensing the thoughts, right? That device cannot interfere with that, and it cannot provide damage your mind or your brain or your blood
Mm-hmm.
vessels or anything over time, right? All this technology needs to be friendly, you know what I mean, over time.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, so there's considerable work being done, but maybe not all that work is going to be friendly. you know that's the other side of the coin, right? Long-term usage.
Mm-hmm.
Think about it.
No, absolutely. It could be health detriments and that type of thing for sure.
Yeah. So when we look at the possibilities um, there are considerable possibilities that are all in place today. They're all being worked on, and that work is going to result in just moving forward with the overall model that I'm talking about with that translation tool. You know.
Yeah, I mean, you can look at. I mean, translation is in a general sense is fairly straightforward, right? Like, for example, I'm in a situation, I'm talking to a person, they're saying something to me, and then I'm getting some sort of literal translation to that. But I also wonder about what about like broader contextual data that could be applied. So, for example, if we were to combine, talking about converging technologies, if we were able to combine not just the translation, but that this system would also feed you wider contextual information, that could be an interesting thing, right? If somebody's saying something to you about something, perhaps, if we think about the way we're using Chat GPT and Perplexity and these things, where it could actually look up extra information, it could give you broader contextual information as well. So it's almost like connecting it to a search engine, I suppose, right? So where somebody gives you some information, and let's think about it like this way, which is sort of interesting, given a certain kind of election that's happening this year, and a lot of the concerns around like misinformation and that type of thing. Could it fact check? When somebody's actually saying something to you, oftentimes in the moment you sort of have to take it at face value, and if you know that person and you trust them, um, then you can say, okay, I have a relationship with this person, I can trust it. If it's someone you don't know, or if it's a politician, for example, being able to sort of fact check that. Now, of course, that comes back to, well, what is, where is it getting its facts, quote unquote, right? And how is if the language model is being trained on misinformation to begin with, then I don't know how good the fact checking is going to be. But I'm just thinking about those like wider contextual things that I could actually help with, because translation is not always just like from one language to another. It's actually saying, well, what does it mean that, in terms of what this person's saying, and is it factual? Does it make sense within the context, or am I being misled? I mean, that's a whole different level of translation. But just curious if you have any thoughts around that.
Well, I mean, I don't know why you don't trust politicians at face value. I don't understand that. But I mean,
Well,
really, let's get into this. Really, I want to just kind of jump back into our tourist, in a different country, you know, that tourist is sitting at a cafe, right, sipping a fine coffee, and you know, uh, talking to a particular person who's speaking a different language to him, and that person picks up a menu in a different language, right? I mean, you can read that document through AI and then translate it to English, right?
mm-hmm.
And then from there, through the conversation, you discuss, well, I have to go to this particular, place, and you leave your dinner, and then you have integration with Google Maps per se, and you're getting directions as you go, right? This is where we're branching into augmented information to help you, right? So
Well, it could
yeah,
also tell you whether it's a safe place to go. For example, I've heard
yeah,
stories of people being manipulated in tourist situations to go to places that are maybe not safe, or just they're going somewhere where the person wants them to go, as opposed to maybe where's the best place to go for what I'm looking for. So it's like, trusting people at face value versus getting broader contextual information
exactly.
about your environment, your
Yeah,
surroundings, right?
yeah. I mean, not to I didn't want to branch into Snopes or cross-checking of facts, but getting that information, like you said, right? So somebody tells you something, but then you get the actual map, and right? Security is a
hmm
big thing when you're in a different country, right? And you're constantly reading sides and trying to process that information. What happens if you take a wrong turn, right? What happens if you're not picking up on specific behaviors of another party 100%, right? Um, and interestingly enough, with these, augmented reality wearable devices, you'd be recording, right? Or you could have these logs, right? You could have this information, uh, you know, being pumped into a data server, one of your data servers, right?
hmm
And then from there, um, where's it go, right? That's another area, right? So you think about it for the wearer's point of view, and then all the other people around them. Privacy is a big concern, right? This is one of the things that came up with Google Glasses, right? People didn't want them, but it's not different than somebody walking around and looking at you and seeing you and hearing you. But when you have a little set of cameras on you, well, that's all of a sudden now it's a different story, which is interesting, right? So there's some challenges around that, but the reality is that these type of tools can help you with your security, right? It can also improve your experience, right, and provide all this augmented, information. It can also allow you to be pretty flexible, right? Because the smarter these systems are, you're no longer, going into your little translator box and manually changing the language. So somebody comes up to you in a different, a dialect, a different subtext, a different language. It says something. Your system can auto respond. It will automatically sense and sort out what that is, and then from there, help you provide a proper response to that person. So you've got all those capabilities that you're capable of doing, and it's all because you're wearing this. They're wearing this technology, and this technology is then tied to some kind of processor, which probably is your cell phone, right? And from there, it's also interfacing directly with you through your eyes, through your ears, and other methods, which we talked about. Maybe possibly you have other interfaces, right? Now, that all being said, all you got to do is really think about, the Men in Black guys and the Matrix agents, and they all have glasses on for some reason.
Yeah.
They're all there and they're surveilling you, right?
Well, that's interesting because for espionage purposes, like being able to, like we talked about earlier, the idea of someone being able to read lips through AI that, that they normally maybe couldn't, for example. I mean, that for surveillance or espionage, they could do those same things as far as being in a crowded marketplace and zoning in on somebody or just looking at video footage and sort of interpreting it. But what about when things go wrong? I guess we've talked a lot about, obviously there's a lot of potential, a lot of great things that can come of these technologies converging and providing an extra a level of translation and that type of thing. But what do we think are some of the risks? Like if, for example, in that type of situation, if it's getting wrong information and now that's being used by a government for a purpose, or even at a micro level where you're interacting with somebody in a different country and for some reason the AI doesn't quite get it right. And next thing you know, you think maybe you're in a dangerous situation, or maybe the translation back is incorrect and now you've put yourself in a dangerous situation, for example. So like, what do we think are some of the potential drawbacks of sort of advancing into this sort of new level of translation and that type of thing?
Well, I mean, I agree that there's going to be a level of error, right? We kind of mentioned that before. It's going to be the 90% plus, but there's going to be like that 10%, right? You're going to have to manage that. I don't think you're ever going to be totally error free in any type of tool out there. I mean, that's just, if you expect that's too hard to achieve. Now, that all being said, will the other aspects of this outweigh, right, these negative points, right? And I would say that, yeah, overwhelmingly you have a number of different positive things. Now, that being said, I mean, where's this information going and who has access to it? Again, the privacy equation, I think, is very important, right? It's because you're recording everything you do, everywhere you go, everybody you see, right? And is that retained, right? I don't know. I mean, these are bigger questions. I mean, if you really think about it, your brain is retaining it. How long is it retaining it? What it thinks is important is what's being retained. So, the argument would be, well, if you're retaining it, what's wrong with having it recorded, right? there's lots of conversations you can have around that, philosophical, but the idea is what are the positives, right? The positives, we go back with think about security, the ability to relate to many different people, and of course this can indeed promote, right, the idea of communication and in different languages in a very we'll call it reasonable response time, right? So your ability now to be multilingual with augmented by AI is there, right? You've got it, and what's the value to that, right? I would say if you're on a a webinar, right, and you have, or sorry, not a webinar, but a web meeting, and you have everybody, all these different people from around the world talking with their different dialects, and the tools are embedded in this web tool to do the translation for you. Now you're opening yourself up to not only different regions, but your different cultures, different ways of thinking. I think it's a good thing, right? Promoting globalization, integrating people. I mean, the biggest barrier in a lot of cases of mankind is all these different languages that we've managed to, develop, and they are minor walls, or maybe not minor, but there are walls in between us, right? So that's a good thing, I think.
Absolutely.
That being said, can these other tools also be augmented to help, for medical, and can they also be helped for, other possible combinations, right? Utilized in other tools that basically we haven't conceptualized yet. I would say, yeah. I mean, this is part of the whole idea about technology being utilized for the greater good.
Absolutely. So, I mean, back to some of the original questions I posed today. I mean, certainly we've established that, we believe AI and other convergence of technologies can certainly improve on some of our limited capabilities today. So I think that's great. We've covered the types of technologies that we can converge, and ultimately understanding that AI and other tech can help improve communication between different cultures and provide benefits. And as you were just saying, it's really about breaking down some of the barriers between cultures, helping us understand people better, helping us, navigate other environments and, communicate in those environments, and potential other benefits to people who have disabilities, benefits to, law enforcement and potentially surveillance. And while there are some, sort of caveats in there, I think we've come to the conclusion that overwhelmingly that there are a lot of positive benefits to, society to be had. Would you agree with that?
I would, and let's spin it back to our Horta, the devil, the devil in the dark. I mean, the theme of this story was that the Horta were actually protecting themselves, right? It was a miscommunication, that was leading to these conflicts, right? And if they had been able to communicate, they would have been able to help each other, right? Going back to your game theory, right? You help each other, you win.
Thank you for listening to the Probability Podcast. Please join us next time for more musings from the generator and the discriminator.